How the United States Air Force Saved My Life by Harry Hallman. As a kid growing up during the 1950s in the blue-collar area of North Philly called Kensington, the expectation was that when, or if, you graduated high school you would get a job in a factory. If you were lucky, you might get a trade job such as plumbing, a policeman, or fireman. You'd work, put in your 50 years and retire to a small home or trailer in the northeast section of the city. If you were very frugal, you might even be able to move to New Jersey or Florida. Now, these are all honest jobs, but I was having trouble seeing myself doing any of them. Most of the parents living in Kensington back then came through the hard times before and during the Great Depression. That depression affected many people's lives, none more than the borderline middle class. Many were forced to quit school to help support their families. Because of that, there wasn't a big emphasis on going to college. Even if there was, very few people had the money to pay the tuition. I wanted something else. Maybe being a champion pool player like my dad would have been fun, but I wasn't a good enough player. The problem was I didn't know what I wanted. I hadn't found myself yet. So I spent my high school years on the streets with my buddies learning to smoke, drink, curse, cutting class and otherwise getting into trouble. The other expectation in Kensington was that when you finished with high school, you got a job. There was no such thing as taking the summer off to take a break. You got a job immediately and you at minimum paid room and board. My board was $15, a bargain wouldn't you say? So at 17, I took a job as an apprentice plumber. After a year of digging ditches in 99-degree weather, I still didn't know what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. I remember feeling like I was on the train to Nowheresville and that I might not be coming back. I'm not sure what motivated me, but I quit my job, joined the Air Force and hoped I would find a career I loved. I didn't know it then, but I was in for a whole lot of life lessons. It started when I stepped out of the car at 401 North Broad Street in downtown Philly. For the first time in my life, I was alone with no family able to support me. Taking the oath of allegiance to protect the United States was the first time I had ever had to make such a promise, and the first time anyone would hold me to it. Basic training was so full of lessons I can't recount them all, so let's put them under the heading of discipline. You did what you were told, and if you didn't you got punished, put in jail or your life ruined with a dishonorable discharge. Heady stuff for an 18-year-old. I learned to make my bed, do my laundry, work as a team, have respect for others, how to get along with people different than me, and above all to pay attention to what I was taught. After basic training, I was sent to a school in Denver. I couldn't wait to start learning my new career. Unfortunately, the Air Force had a different idea of what that career would be. I was to learn how to load bombs onto airplanes. Yikes. You know Delta doesn't hire bomb loaders. I checked. With little or no chance that I would be able to use my Air Force training as a civilian, I began to feel like I was back on that train to nowhere. I learned that you couldn't take anything for granted. Sometimes something happens and puts you back on course without you even knowing it. Call it God's intervention or providence. After a month of kitchen duty and shoveling coal waiting for my bomb loading class to start, I and several others were pulled out of formation one morning and told to see the master sergeant. He asked me if I had studied physics in high school. I said, no, Mastbaum was a trade school. He said, if you didn't study physics then you can't load bombs on airplanes. I asked, then what can I do? I was hiding my joy about losing the coveted loading bombs job. He handed me a book and said, pick anything, except intelligence school. That's for brainiacs, which you are not. I looked, and I didn't see anything that interested me. I was as confused as ever. Fortunately, I had met a guy at the local beer hangout who said he was going to photo school. That stayed with me for some reason, and I asked the sergeant about it. He said, yeah, they teach that on the other side of the base. I didn't know it then, but I guess later it was as far away from the normal schools as they could get it. You know how those creative types are? Wouldn't want them contaminating regular military. Anyway, I asked how long the school was. The sergeant told me it was 17 weeks. I thought about it for a second, realizing the other schools were mostly 6 months or longer. I said, I'll take it. I was very excited to get started, but I had to wait 30 days until the new class began. You might have guessed that I spent the 30 days doing KP, kitchen patrol. That's when I learned that officers ate a heck of a lot better than enlisted men did. Still, I was happy to be getting into something I could make a career of when I left the USAF. What I really learned was that you don't always get what you want and that sometimes the stars align just right for you. I hated the first week in photo school. Why did I do this? I thought, but that passed, and I soon started to love it. What I didn't realize then was it wasn't photography in general that I loved, it was being a communicator. I was pretty good at photography, and after almost failing the first week's class, I made Airman of the Week my second week. I did learn some leadership skills as well. It snowed during the time I was Airman of the Week, so I had to take a squad of fellow students outside in the 10-degree weather to shovel the pavements. I had done this before but never when I was in charge, so when my 5-man crew started shoveling I joined them. One of the guys told me since I was the boss I didn't have to shovel. I remember thinking, why should I ask you to do something I wouldn't do? I kept shoveling. A leader leads from the front. That lesson came in handy later on. After photo school, I knew a lot about photography, but I had so much more to learn. My first on-the-job training was at the SAC Air Base March Field in Riverside, California. It was the spring of 1963, and our job was to process film taken by aerial recon aircraft. We also had to serve as base photographer several times a month. I got to take photos of bullet holes in homes in the on-base housing section. I also took photos of an operation on an airman who was injured in an auto accident, took photos of 2 Marine pilots killed in a helicopter crash, and photographed the damage a truck driver did to a B-52 airplane when he backed into it. It was certainly a learning experience, but the real lesson was I began to believe in myself. During the fall of 1963, I was making prints in the darkroom when someone rushed in and said that President Kennedy had been shot. We all came to the main area as the news coverage of this horrible event continued. The base and every other base went on automatic alert. No one could leave. The only thing on TV was recaps of Kennedy's life and work as president. I was amazed by the fact that people from around the world so loved Kennedy. It was the first time I realized the real importance of the President of the United States. I continued to learn, got promoted and strengthened my love affair with photography. I didn't know it then, but by the summer of 1964, just a few weeks after my 20th birthday, I was going to need everything I had learned and much more. When I stepped out of the cool interior of the Boeing 707, it was as if a wave of hot bath water hit me in the face. I had no idea a country could be this hot and humid and people still live. As I walked down the steps, I saw the largest insect I have ever seen sitting calmly on the side of the tarmac. To this day I still don't know what it was. What I do know is that I was super excited, energized and confident that I could do any job the Air Force threw at me. The United States Air Force had taught me well. Being in Vietnam for the first time in 1964 was an experience unlike any I had even dreamt. It was an unfamiliar culture. We worked 8-hour shifts 7 days a week processing film from U-2 airplanes and drones. I learned so much I cannot even approach writing about it all, so I'll relate just one thing, and that is the price of war. The main road on Ton Son Nhut Air Base in Saigon ran from the entrance to the flight line. Pretty much everyone had to walk this road to do anything. Every so often we would see a flag-draped coffin being driven from the flight line to the mortuary. As the procession passed, everyone stopped and saluted out of respect. It was a humbling and sad experience. I left Saigon in March of 1965 and returned in May 1965 for another 1-year term. When I returned, there were so many bodies sent to the mortuary that it was done in secret and no one had a chance to pay their respects. The most horrifying image I have from Vietnam is seeing metal coffins stacked 2 stories high outside of the base mortuary waiting for their occupants. There's a lesson for you. Life is fleeting. Take advantage of it when you can. You might be thinking, why did I return to Vietnam? Yes, I volunteered. There were a couple of reasons, but none more important than because I was in love. Within a few months, I asked my commander for permission to get married. He tried to talk me out of it and made me see the chaplain, who also tried to talk me out of it. The Air Force had taught me to rely on my judgment, and finally, they permitted me to marry. The paperwork took many more months to get straight, but it was worth it. The lesson was, if you believe in something, never give up. That 21-year-old Vietnamese girl has been my wife for over 52 years now. I guess the marriage worked out. I have 2 wonderful children who run their own companies. I was able to get a job when I left the Air Force, first making prints and second as head medical photographer at the U of P Vet School. I founded 2 marketing and 1 web development companies and hired hundreds of people throughout my career. I live in a house I could not have even imagined when I was a kid. If it weren't for the United States Air Force and the lessons they taught me, I don't know what my life would have been. If you believe in destiny, I guess it would have happened exactly the way it did. If you believe in chance, it would have been a totally different life. I don't believe in destiny and chance does happen, but it is rare. I believe that most things happen based on the decisions you make in life and how you react to the obstacles placed in front of you. I wouldn't change anything, except for one thing. If I could go back in time, I would invest in Microsoft and Apple.